we're going to go ahead and order today's meeting. And can we please begin with a roll call of members present?
Janice Mader-Thompson.
Here.
Chris Corsi.
Here.
Susan Harvey.
Ben Ford, alternate.
Gerard Giudice.
Here.
Nasa Hinton.
Here.
Ariel Kelly.
Here.
Todd Lands.
Present.
JB Leak.
Here.
Sandra Lowe.
Here.
Jeff Krepke.
Here.
David Rabbit.
Here.
Chair Linda Hopkins.
Present.
Thank you all today.
And with that, we are going to go ahead and move on to public comment on items not on the regular agenda, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Board of Directors. Is there anyone in person who wishes to make comment? Seeing none, Dawn, do we have anyone online or any comments received in advance?
Nothing received in advance, and I see no comments online.
Okay, with that, we will go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. Also, do we actually have a name tag for Ben that we could swap out? That'd just be nice, so that otherwise you're Susan for the day. I'm gonna get that right. Okay, we're on it. Perfect. With that, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. Is there anyone who wishes to pull any items from consent today? Seeing none, I will ask if there are any members of the public who wish to comment on the consent calendar. Does anyone in person wish to comment on the consent calendar? Seeing none, is there anyone online, Dawn, or any comments received in advance?
No comments received in advance and no comments online.
With that, is there a motion on the consent calendar, which is items 4.1 through 4.5?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second, and I believe because we are all in person, we can just do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, that does carry unanimously with those present. With that, we will go ahead and move on to our regular calendar for today. And we are going to start with an update from planning. I think that Chris will be introducing the MTC Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus update.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Directors. Happy to be here today to introduce Chirag Rabari from MTC ABAG to provide an update on Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus. So before I turn things over to Chirag, I'll just provide a really high-level update. So Plan Bay Area is the region's fourth iteration of an integrated long-range transportation plan, which considers the connections between land use and transportation in the Bay Area. So it serves as the Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, and Sustainable Community Strategy, or SES, for the region as required by state law. So one major component of the plan, which was adopted earlier this year, is the regional blueprint, which highlights 35 strategies. They're really focused on implementing the plan, covering transportation, housing, economic, and environmental strategies. It includes preferred growth geographies, such as priority development areas, and it includes a regional list of major transportation projects. Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus is moving into the final planning phases now, with work focused on the final plan document, the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, and the Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus implementation plan. Final plan of public engagement and public comment will open later this month. Staff will be reviewing the plan, draft documents, and we'll consider bringing a comment letter back to the board in December if there's interest in submitting comments. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Chirag to give us an update on Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, board members. So my name is Chirag Rabari, and I'm the Assistant Director of Major Plans at the Regional Planning Program at MTC ABAG, and also the Project Manager for this effort. So as Chris mentioned, we are pretty far along in what is roughly a 3-year planning process. We have had 3 engagement rounds and 3 board actions to date, and we are gearing up for our 4th and final round of engagement, as well as our 4th and final board action, hopefully early next year. So as Chris mentioned, the plan does serve as a federally required RTP and state required SCS. But it also seeks to, deal with the various issues that the region is facing, and it has evolved over time to go beyond simply meeting planning requirements. The first Plan Bay Area really tried to establish a shared regional emphasis on sustainability and focused growth. The next iteration of the plan in 2017 really highlighted the connections between our regional housing crisis and some of our ongoing challenges with our taxed transportation network. And the most recently adopted plan in 2021 expanded even farther out in scope to also include an environment element as well as an economy element, and really tried to hone in on specific actions that we can take to advance the plan, including greater emphasis on resilience and equity. For this current plan update, it's really been dealing with some of the post-pandemic challenges that the region has faced, including remote work, the transit ridership declines, as well as rising office vacancies in many of our regional downtowns, and associated fiscal challenges, including major reductions in anticipated transportation revenue, and also recalibrating some of the plan's housing strategies to try to get more cost-effective delivery of affordable housing. In terms of some of the major planning efforts this plan pursued, we did launch a effort called Transit 2050 Plus to really reimagine transit in this post-pandemic period in collaboration with many of our region's transit operators, including SMART. They were part of the project management team for that effort. We also did some select improvements in our environment element, including a first ever sea level rise resilience project list that we worked on in collaboration with BCDC, and also worked to meet our plan's statutorily required climate target as set by the California Air Resources Board. Oops. So on October 20th, we will release the draft Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus review for public review and comment. And this is one of the most significant milestones in the planning process. Chris mentioned we have a draft plan document, and that's really the storytelling device of the plan, the EIR as required under SCTCA. And our main focus today is to talk about the implementation plan, which identifies near-term actions that MTC and ABAG can take to advance the long-range strategies in the plan over the next 5 years. Again, just as a very quick preview for that plan document, really just tries to provide an orientation to the plan, what its assumptions are, what the strategies are, what would happen in the future if this plan were to actually be implemented, and then an overview of its implementation actions, and that's supplemented by 10 additional technical reports. The EIR includes all of the environmental impact areas as required by SCTCA. It identifies impacts, mitigation strategies, and significance conclusions, and it compares the plan to 3 alternatives as defined through the scoping process that was held earlier this year. And again, our focus today is on the implementation plan, which proposes 66 actions across these 6 vehicles, whether they're planning, funding, coordinating, advocating, delivering, or assisting. And some of the key priorities are to deliver existing commitments as opposed to identifying many new commitments for the agencies, transition some of our successful pilots into ongoing initiatives, and then importantly, securing needed resources to sustain sustain progress. I will say that this is definitely the most dynamic part of the final phase of the planning process. There's a lot of opportunity to revise these draft actions, and that's one of our key areas of input that we're going to be looking for from partners across the region over the next several months. Within the transportation space, obviously there are some funding challenges that the region is dealing with at the moment. So, we will support efforts to secure a regional transportation measure, possibly next year in 2026, as well as advancing our priorities in the next federal surface transportation reauthorization, which is due to expire towards the end of next year. On the delivery side, we want to expand some of the successes we've had with our Clipper Bay Pass, as well as expanding some of our regional mapping and wayfinding operations. I believe one of the pilots of those efforts is located in Santa Rosa, and seeing some good results there. Also hoping to work with partners on improving the efficiency and cost effectiveness of transportation project delivery. This is a major challenge that we have all across the country right now, and hoping to see what we can do to manage risks in the Bay Area. And then on the assisting side, really taking a look at how we manage congestion in the region, including a review of our future express lanes, and expanding our emphasis on street safety and active transportation. In the housing and economy space, again, major needs on the funding side. So the idea is to coordinate with a variety of partners on potential near-term ballot measures, which could be a regional measure, could be local or county level measures to expand affordable housing funding, while also looking for additional resources at the state level to make sure we can continue regional housing programs and provide technical assistance to our local partners. We hope to continue supporting local jurisdictions with their housing element implementation, as well as continuing implementation of the transit-oriented communities policy, which has been an active conversation. And on the planning side, working on updating a regional goods movement plan, which hasn't been reconsidered in the last 10 years or so. And then again, look at how economic priorities can be considered in future planning efforts. On the environmental side, we want to expand our partnerships with BCDC and other partners to pursue planning, funding, and project delivery technical assistance for sea level rise adaptation. Later this month, we'll be holding a webinar as we try to enhance our offerings in the seismic and wildfire space. Again, technical assistance and other resources. Also take a look at a lot of transportation demand management initiatives. We also are hoping to expand efforts in terms of expanding electric mobility options, as well as working with a variety of partners in the electrification space. We know that a lot of people who are working on a lot of issues have challenges working with PG&E. There are a lot of grid barriers, and how can we work together to help address shared needs? And then kind of that ties together all of these different elements. We want to support some key reforms to this planning framework, SB 375, which is getting a little long in the tooth. It's been, about 16, 17 years since it was initially enacted. So there are some key reforms we're hoping to identify. Again, I've mentioned it a few times, technical assistance for local partners is going to be a major focus area over the next few years, really making sure things are easy to find, clear to understand, and tailored to priorities that are on the ground here. We also want to increase our engagement with the disability community and, make a push in the accessibility space to make sure that those needs are being met. And then finally, a variety of planning efforts that we're going to pursue to really understand kind of where we are now and where are we going in the future. I'll just say again that in terms of, these are MTC and ABAG's implementation commitments, and we do that to ensure transparency and accountability, that these are things that we can actually deliver on. But obviously, a lot of the action is at the local level. So we want to make sure that we're providing resources and tools for our local partners to be able to do work, in their local communities. And so we will provide a variety of tools that we'll make available on our websites, whether it's, data, mapping, other guidelines, ensuring support for funding and grant opportunities, as well as providing playbooks for implementation and other technical assistance opportunities. I will remind everyone that this is, at the end of the day, this is a plan. It does not allocate money to projects or strategies. It does not override local land use authority, does not impose mandates or propose specific legislation. Okay, so what's next? Final round of public engagement. As Chris mentioned, we will be putting this out on October 20th, and we'll be accepting comments through December 18th. There will be 4 sub-regional webinars that we will be promoting, including one focused on the North Bay on October 29th. There will be 3 hybrid public hearings, including one in Novato on December 4th. And then there will be a variety of other engagement and input opportunities. So we will conclude that final engagement round and comment period this fall. We'll review the comments and prepare any needed revisions, and then hopefully present the final Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus for adoption, the final EIR for certification by MTC and ABAG early next year. And I will just flag in terms of some of the remaining regulatory milestones for the plan. So it does need to be approved by our state and federal partners. CARB has final approval over the plan's GHG methodologies and assumptions. And as you all may be aware, in June 2025, the federal government rescinded the California vehicle emissions waiver. And that has triggered what is known as a air quality conformity lockdown, which essentially just means that we don't have a valid federally approved emissions tool to quantify vehicle emissions. And that because of that, it could potentially delay federal approval of this plan. But that said, we are working to address ongoing CARB concerns and questions about the plan's GHG assumptions, strategies, and progress, and working with a variety of regional and state partners to minimize the impacts of that conformity lockdown. Although I will note that the ultimate resolution of that issue does depend upon EPA and CARB coming to an agreement, and we hope that that agreement comes soon. And then finally, in 2026, we will kick off what will be known as a major plan update, Plan Bay Area 2060. And it's really going to look at kind of different types of policy and funding trajectories for the region. This was a limited and focused update. This next plan will take a wider lens at a whole host of topics. We'll cover issues like artificial intelligence, automated vehicles, shifting demographics in the region, and much more. And with that, happy to answer any questions or just take any comment. I would share that in terms of if SCTA were to submit a comment letter, we'd be, very interested in hearing whether the implementation priorities that have been identified, whether they resonate, or whether you have other priorities that you'd like to see reflected, or whether there are things going on, in this part of the region that you think are notable and worth sharing as kind of examples or successful initiatives. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Actually, let me first go to the members of the public to see if there are any comments on this item before we go to board questions and discussion. Seeing no one in person. Dawn, is there anyone online?
There's no online comments.
With that, I will bring it back to my colleagues. Director Lance?
Yeah, I was waiting to see if anyone else wanted to go first. Thank you for your presentation. I know there's a little snafu a couple of years ago when Cloverdale was left off of this plan. Is Cloverdale included in this, and does that include the SMART train going to Cloverdale?
So the plan includes the extension to Healdsburg. So we have the full extent of the planned routes for the SMART train that is included on the project list.
I think you meant Cloverdale.
Yes, Cloverdale. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
I was-
yes, Healdsburg was
Made me a little nervous right there.
Yeah, no. Yes,
I was like, oh boy, here we go. No, okay, thank you
no,
very much.
yes, we've been working closely with. I was thinking about the amendment. Yeah, we did an amendment last fall to include Healdsburg, and then for the current project list, we included Cloverdale as well.
Thank you.
All the way to Cloverdale, just confirming.
Yes.
Okay,
all the way
great.
to
I'm so grateful we
Yes.
do not have to relitigate that issue. Anything else, Director Lance? No? Vice Chair Kelly?
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It's always great to see, where this is headed and just getting an update. It seems like just as soon as we finish one update, it's like the next one begins. And so I think with respect to Northern Sonoma County and a couple of components as we think about kind of the region and the jobs, housing, transit balance that we're all trying to achieve in some of the economic driver components. So two things. I'm curious about freight rail and if freight is something that you guys look at from an economic perspective. We have a huge manufacturing industry, sometimes includes wine or other agricultural products that we're using a lot of trucks on our highways to be shipping, and really trying to look at freight service as potentially one of those things that could reduce some of the impact on our roads and traffic and congestion. Is freight rail something that you guys look at within this plan and other parts of the Bay Area? And is that something that's being discussed for the North Bay?
So yeah, freight rail is something that I will admit has not been a major focus of our planning efforts to date, but that is part of why we are including it in the implementation plan for this effort, to do a major update of our regional goods movement strategy, which will include a more substantive look at freight rail. I think our last goods movement plan was adopted in maybe 2015 or 2016. So it's been a while. There have been a lot of developments since then. So we think that, it is a good time to do a comprehensive look at goods movement, at freight throughout the entire region. And we look forward to, collaborating with a variety of partners to understand what the needs are and where there are opportunities.
Great. I mean, I think that's wonderful to hear. And I think especially with what's happening with Highway 37 and that east-west movement and kind of key corridors as we're looking north-south on the 101 corridor, how we can continue to be, I mean, it is included in the county's general plan and on the seal of our county, agriculture is certainly one of the major driving industries here. And especially as we look at what role we play across the Bay Area, but manufacturing and also timber and other historic, natural resource movement of goods here has always been, something in that a place that Sonoma County kind of has a role in the region. And so I think looking at freight and how we are not just focused on trucking is something to be weighed and considered. And then especially with the Highway 37 changes that are in front of us, what that could potentially mean for having freight included in future rail conversations. So, and then the only other thing I had a question about was about Geyserville in the rail conversation. So there have been kind of on and off conversations about whether or not at the SMART board, if Geyserville is going to be moving forward with a station, it is in the SMART trains strategic plan. And so I just wasn't sure if that was something that had been on your radar with respect to Plan Bay Area, since the train will, if it is going to Cloverdale, as we just discussed, it will be passing directly through Geyserville as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is on our radar, and it's certainly something that, we'll be collaborating with SMART and SCTA on as those, plans come together. And I think, if funding is identified, there are a variety of mechanisms that could be considered for, incorporation, either on an administrative basis or an amendment basis or in the future plan. So we'll be collaborating with the local partners up here on that as plans develop.
Great. And I think separate but similar, the tribal consultation process that had been discussed previously in prior iterations of Plan Bay Area and kind of the conversation that was happening at MTC about how do we meaningfully engage our tribal communities. And as we sit in Sonoma County with respect to the rest of the Bay Area, we have a large number of federally recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes here. And so on behalf of, not speaking for, but speaking in reflection on those conversations I've had previously with tribal leadership, there's been a great deal of frustration about that tribal engagement process and not feeling like it was meaningfully the energy that was put forward by the tribes to try to engage with MTC, but then feeling like their input was fell on deaf ears. I just want to say that is really important to me, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I have heard them say similarly that ensuring that our tribal communities also are able to meaningfully participate in Plan Bay Area and that it's not just lip service, but that it is truly important. I just want to reiterate that those tribal communities are very important in Sonoma County historically and in the future, and that these planning efforts have to have meaningful inclusion in with those voices. Thank you.
Thank you. Well put. Any other questions, Director Rabbit?
Thank you very much. My heart skipped a beat when you didn't mention Cloverdale, since I think when I was an MTC commissioner, I did convince the commission to overcome a reluctant staff, and with the help of our executive director, to include Cloverdale in the plan. As you know, it's fiscally constrained, and there's lots of reasons that make that difficult, but I'm glad it's there, and we're moving full speed ahead. You mentioned freight. I think at some point in time, if freight becomes a component of our ultimate climate goals and our transportation system here in the North Bay, right now, our freight system is held up. It hasn't been working for the last week or more because of a bridge malfunction. Piece had to be manufactured and put in the bridge, and it's still not working. And I know that I'm hearing from the customers who are being served by the freight system, as most of them are in Petaluma, and they are hauling from Shellville by truck. But obviously, even in the best of times, freight is being subsidized. And we need to come up with a long-term financial plan to have the capital improvements needed to improve that piece of rail that goes from on the eastern portion from our corridor over to Shelville and beyond, because that's where the problems lie. And we've been piecemealing that together with a lot of help from the state at times, but there's not a comprehensive approach. And before we can actually get more freight service further north, we have to make sure that the rail is continuous and operating going forward. I'm glad you mentioned the tribal engagement. I know that we're all struggling with the tribal engagement in many different ways and complying with, is it AB 52? One thing that's interesting in Sonoma County, 15 months ago, we had 15 tribes that were on the list of those to be notified. Today we have 26. So in 15 months, it's expanded. The state has not given a lot of direction on how you actually notify and work with those tribes. So we continue to look for some additional guidance from the state for best practices going forward, because it's a challenge in the best of times, and we have to figure it out together. And California is unique in that regard in the tribal world. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Yes, Director Lowe.
I just want to associate myself with the same remarks of Commissioner Rabbit that currently, anything in and out of Shelville, especially now, is just very problematic. And of course, we do have rail lines that go into Sonoma. And, speaking for the East County, as we really need some support there between Highway 37 and 121. It's a nightmare out there at the moment. So I know that'll be another part of the conversation later today to talk about the repairs that are being made out there. But I just appreciate the remarks, and we certainly could use some help out there. Thanks.
Other comments or questions from my colleagues? One question, just as someone who recently joined the California Air Resources Board, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about what I understand is potentially a disagreement between CARB and MTC in terms of electric vehicles and sort of overall greenhouse gas emissions reduction over time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a technically complicated topic, but I think the crux of the back and forth that we have with staff, I think really just has to do with the electrification strategies that are included in the plan, and how much credit for assumed or projected GHG reduction that MTC can take versus what might just be assumed by state level actions. We, I think, try to ensure that we are appropriately sharing credit with, assumed state investments and state policies, as well as federal, what until about a week ago were federal incentives that existed, but that no longer exist. So that's really, I think, where the crux of the disagreement is what types of vehicles are you allowed to take credit for? What types of trips are you allowed to take credit for? And how much of that credit should go to the region versus how much should go to the state or other partners? And then there are also questions about, well, just how much progress have we actually made in the real world in implementing some of these strategies that are included in the plan. So, we have a technical methodology process that we engage with the ARB staff, and we, are working closely with them to make sure that their questions are addressed, their concerns are addressed, but that we do think that the region has a role to play in moving forward progress on electrification, particularly in the face of what is now a hostile federal administration.
Great, thank you very much. I also just want to echo the comments of my colleagues, Director Kelly in particular, about tribal engagement and the need for sort of deep engagement with our tribal community as we move forward with this study and this plan. And then the other thing that I wanted to put a pin in was just I think it's very easy for Sonoma County to feel a bit abandoned by the Bay Area because we are rural in nature and we have so many small towns. And so I know that, you know, this is not entirely on MTC, but I think that one of my biggest frustrations was when the RENA came out and gave us literally thousands of housing units that we were supposed to stuff into unincorporated Sonoma County. And yet many of these communities that were actually absorbing those units lacked access to the sort of funds that would be needed to improve the infrastructure in order to accommodate the additional housing units. And so I want to be very clear, like I am not a NIMBY. I actually have a lot of small towns that would love to have more housing so that we could actually keep our schools open and keep, you know, families in our communities and have workforce that lives and works locally. But we do need access to funds really to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety and also to support enhanced transit services. And so just wanted to flag that, you know, if there are any sort of policies, you know, sort of initiatives that could be written into this plan that would support and uplift rural communities, that would really be appreciated because too often we're not even really eligible for the funds because they're really geared towards the Metro Bay Area. And yet we are asked to absorb housing units and, you know, do our fair share in terms of housing development. But you can't just put a bunch of folks and then have kids walking to school on the side of a rural highway with no crosswalks and no infrastructure to keep them safe. So just wanted to sort of share that feedback. Any final comments from anyone else? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming and making the trip up here. Really appreciate it, you being in person here today, and thank you for a glimpse into this planning process.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to hand it over to James. Up next, we have our advocacy item.
All right, so our next item is the legislative update. It's a broad coverage of both our state and federal advocacy. We do have Kiana Valentine and Chris Lee here from Politico Group to do a legislative recap for 2025. The governor signed many bills, has until October 12th to sign the last of them that he plans to sign. And I also, with the recap that you're going to hear from them today, I'd like the board to keep in mind that we will be coming to the board in December with draft 2026 legislative principles to solicit board feedback. And then in early 26, our first meeting of 26, we'll ask board adoption of those 26 principles. So with that being said, is Chris or Kiana?
They're both coming online.
All right.
As we speak here.
I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great. I don't know if you can see me.
We can't see you, but we can see the slide at least.
Okay, great.
So
Okay.
we're halfway
And I'm-
there.
All right, perfect. And the slide's probably the most important part, and I'm sure Chris will join us in a moment, but in the interest of time and keeping you guys on track, I will go ahead and dive in. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you again. We are happy to be here to give you an update, an overview, a wrap up, if you will, of the last few months and sort of the totality of activities in the 2025 state legislative session. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. And so these are some of the topics we're going to touch on, and then of course we'll have questions and discussion afterwards, but we want to hit on some important issues to the Sonoma County Transportation and Climate Authorities, including cap and trade reauthorization, the Prop 4 climate bond from 2024, the first year of implementation of that bond, and then several bills on the governor's desk that SCTCA had positions on this year. And then we will preview what we think will be some hot topics in the transportation and related spaces for 2026. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we get to what happened with cap and trade reauthorization, because by now I'm sure you all have heard the legislature and administration did reach an agreement on cap and trade reauthorization. We wanted to just set the table and remind folks of what we have been doing since cap and trade was signed into law and implemented. the existing program would have expired in 2030. And the program itself sets a statewide limit for sources of GHG sources responsible for 85% of the emissions statewide. Over its lifetime, it has generated
Deanna, we lost you.
okay.
Oh, you're back.
And with hello.
Now we see
Hey, now
you.
we see
All
you.
right.
Hi.
I'm not sure where I got cut off. I was just about to talk about the history of revenue generation and programs. Is that the right place to pick up?
Yes.
Okay, great. So over Cap and Trade's lifetime to date, I think about 14 years, it's generated around $28 billion from auction proceeds, which 65% of which were continuously appropriated into 5 programs. The other 35% was subject to the annual budget process where the legislature decided where it wanted to invest its resources on any given year. So under the previous cap and trade deal, 25% went to high-speed rail, 20% of all revenues went to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, 10% to Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, another 5% for low-carbon transit operations, and then 5% for safe and affordable drinking water. So that's where we were at until a couple of weeks ago. Next slide, please. Great. So there was a lot of speculation, a lot of gossip, rumor, innuendo as to whether the legislature and the administration were really going to be able to come together in the remaining few weeks to get cap and trade reauthorized. And in the last few days, that's exactly what happened. Not just cap and trade, though. They actually ended up coming together on a 6-bill climate and energy package. If you have questions on the other aspects of that, we can talk about that. But for this, for the purposes of the presentation, again, we wanted to focus on cap and trade, which was extended to 2045. And I guess I'm going to have trouble giving it a new name. They did rename it. It is now called the Cap and Invest Program. So I should probably practice saying that more frequently. They implemented a lot of structural changes into how the program will operate going forward. In particular, they increased consumer credits on electric utility bills. That was a main component of the affordability conversation as it relates to cap and trade. They instituted new requirements for legislative oversight. So CARB is going to have to appear before the legislature and talk about implementation of the program and the decisions they're making, some of the regulatory setup. And then there is quite a bit of additional technical direction and program tweaks that the bill directed CARB to address as they set up the system going forward. So that was all adopted as part of AB 1207 by Assemblymember Irwin. That was the bill that actually extended the program. A companion vehicle, SB 840 by Senator McGuire and Limon, the sitting President Pro Tem and the soon-to-be, or I guess the President Pro Tem-elect, they authored the Cap and Invest Expenditure Plan. And I think the next slide, if memory serves, will walk us through how the money will flow going forward. And it's, I would say, pretty decent changes in terms of how the money flows. And as long as auction proceeds continue to perform at sort of peak levels, there shouldn't be necessarily any impact to those programs that received a benefit of continuous appropriation prior, so high-speed rail, TIRCP, LCTOP, AHSC. I'm going to use the acronyms going forward. I think you all are familiar with those programs at this point. But should cap and trade revenues not perform sort of at the high mark, if you will, there will be some implications. So you'll see a note on the bottom left of the slide is the state needs to generate approximately 4.3 billion in total auction proceeds every year to complete this waterfall fully. So whereas there was sort of two tranches last time around based on percentages of funds for continued appropriation and then whatever was remaining the legislature allocated, the first tier or the first sort of bite at the cap and trade apple, if you will, is several sort of backfill provisions, $150 million to backfill the manufacturing sales tax exemption, another $90 million to backfill CAL FIRE state responsibility area fee. For those that followed this closely, there was significant proposals adopted in the current budget to give some general fund relief for CAL FIRE. And there was a potential of much more significant cap and trade investment in CAL FIRE. And so where that landed was $90 million ongoing under this law. And then $3 million annually to establish a legislative council climate bureau. So once those are taken off the top, the next tier is that high-speed rail gets $1 billion. And then the legislature sets aside the next billion or another $1 billion for its priorities via the budget process. That happens before the appropriations to those other programs that fund a lot of what regional agencies do in the transportation and housing space. So the third tier is $1.73 billion for AHSC, TIRCP, the low carbon transit operations, safe and affordable drinking water, and then $250 million for new programs in community air protection or AB 617 implementation. And so once those are funded, anything remaining would also be subject to the budget allocation process. But let me back up to the third tier really quick. Say, you know, in a year where the state doesn't generate $4.3 billion, it's that third tier of programs that's going to be impacted. So actually, I'm going to bump us to the next slide with that in mind. So these are the programs that are in that third tranche. And so say there's only $1 billion left after the first two off the top or sort of appropriations. All of these programs would be reduced in total. So, you know, if there was $1 billion left, they would figure out how to reduce these programs in kind. So there is some risk, I think, under the way the legislature and administration agreed to these appropriations if the overall performance sort of declines. The next slide shows a little bit about the history, though, of how GGRF proceeds have come in over the last few years. So I think because of some uncertainty in the market, the 24-25 auction proceeds dipped a little bit lower than the previous 3 years. But in 2 of the 5 years showing here, the state did get to that $4.3 billion sort of minimum mark to ensure all the programs are funded. And you'll notice one of the trade-offs with a set amount versus a percentage is that, at least for high-speed rail, they're guaranteed $1 billion a year. And you'll see 5 years ago, they only got $656 million. Last year, it was only 845. So they're trading certainty for a little less money potentially. That's not to say the legislature couldn't then use its funding for legislative priorities to fund high-speed rail, but that's just the minimum amount guaranteed to them. In the AHSC program, the next column over, in that high watermark year, the program got $1 billion. So an $800 million allocation is less than its sort of highest earning mark. But then 2 of those 5 years was under 800. So again, you're trading hopefully a little bit more certainty in programmatic levels, assuming auctions continue to perform well versus the other approach giving percentages. Hopefully that made sense. I have looked at this nonstop for the last couple of weeks, and so it's starting to gel in my head. But if this is the first time you're sort of seeing the waterfalls and how prior authorization compares to this authorization, I may need to provide some more clarity. But I think with that, and I do believe Chris is on now, he was gonna take over and present on the climate bond implementation.
Hey everyone, next slide, please. Great. So again, just to recap, Proposition 4 of 2024 authorized $10 billion in bond funding. These are the total funding categories. So this has been presented before. So let's go to the next slide. So part of this year's budget conversation was working on appropriations for the climate bond funding that had been authorized by the ballot measure. And so this slide is just a brief summary to kind of show, after 1 year of budget action, where are we at in terms of funding that's actually been appropriated. And really it ranges from a high of almost 2/3 of the total funding in really the parks area, and a low of just under 1/4 of the funding in the extreme heat mitigation chapter, which coincidentally is the area where a lot of the grant programs that we've been focused on with SCTCA are included. And so let's go to the next slide. So we did a deeper dive, and that was actually sent to you all as a handout from Dawn earlier today, because there's over 120 line items in the budget under the climate bond funded programs. And so what we were trying to do is take a more targeted look based on the programs that we've been working on with SCTCA staff to suggest where the region versus individual agencies in Sonoma County might be working on coordination. And so the items included there are the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. So there's $20 million there that will be going out in grants under those appropriations. Urban Greening Competitive Grants, $46 million. And then an area where we want to pay a lot of attention as programs are being developed: Transformative Climate Communities, Community Resilience Centers, and the Urban Forestry Program under CAL FIRE. Those all have much smaller appropriations in the fiscal year for program development and guidelines. And so one of the key issues as this was under discussion in the legislature and budget committee this year was how much ongoing oversight would the legislature have over how funding is allocated. Particularly, that was a priority of the Assembly. And AB 149 is the budget trailer bill on public resources, and it included a provision applicable to climate bond funded programs that kind of struck a balance between let's get this money out as fast as possible, and let's provide stakeholders and the public and others, including the legislature, the ability to make sure that the regulations and the guidelines for how the funding will be distributed adheres to the bond intent. And so there's basically an authorization for agencies to adopt emergency regulations, which, again, require public review and comment, but let them go through the process a little bit faster, versus I think what the administration may have preferred in many instances was just an exemption from having to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act altogether. So for these programs that we've worked with staff to identify as priorities, we'll be closely monitoring the guideline development and look for opportunities to make sure that the efforts of SCTCA, particularly as it relates to coordinating amongst all the jurisdictions in the county, can be reflected in those guidelines where applicable. Next slide. So just briefly here, as Kiana mentioned, or maybe it was a meeting I was in earlier, but Because the session was extended by one day to the 13th, the governor got until the 13th to sign bills. And so some of the measures that we've been closely monitoring with SCTCA this year or engaging on that are on the governor's desk are listed here below. On Friday afternoon, right after we had finalized these slides, 2 of these were signed. So Assembly Bill 1014 by Assemblymember Rogers, which basically gives Caltrans the same sort of flexibility that local agencies recently received when they're setting speed limits on local serving roads that have high concentrations of pedestrians and bicyclists and, things like your business districts and in many of our small town downtowns. That bill was signed on Friday. And then Senate Bill 707 by the local government chair, Maria Elena Durasso from Los Angeles, which makes a lot of modernizations to the Brown Act, particularly to facilitate remote meeting technology. And then the 2 key provisions that are most relevant to SCTCA there are number 1, it extends the just cause flexibilities for members of Brown Act bodies to participate remotely and to do that for caregiving responsibilities, for work-related travel, and several other criteria. Extends that out to 2030, again, without requiring posting your location and opening it to the public. And then for advisory bodies, such as the one that SCTCA has, allows those bodies to meet remotely without requiring an in-person quorum. So for those community volunteers that are dedicating their time for advisory bodies, really, we think helps facilitate participation and representation there. The other items on the list here are not yet signed or vetoed by the governor. So AB 697 by Wilson related to incidental take permits related to the SR 37 project, still on the governor's desk. The Connect Bay Area Act, which again focused on the 5 counties in the south part of the Bay Area, also still under consideration. And then relevant to SCTCA perhaps in the future, but SB 512 by Senator Perez, which clarifies the process for how citizens' initiatives for self-help transportation measures can qualify for the ballot, is also on the governor's desk. And we'll go to the next slide. I think Kiana was going to wrap this one up, and then we'll see if there's any questions or discussion.
Great, thanks, Chris. It's October 6th. I feel like the legislature is going to be back in town very quickly. They returned to Sacramento on January 5th to pick up the second year of the 2-year legislative session. So a few things that we wanted to preview on the last day of session, or second to last day of session in September. They did announce the transition date for the leadership, the Senate President Pro Tem position. So Senator McGuire will be stepping down, and Senator Monique Limon from the Santa Barbara area will be taking over on the 17th of November. With that transition, typically there is a lot of changes to committee leadership. Obviously, her own leadership team will change, and so there could be a lot of new committee chairs in the Senate. We noted a question mark next to the Assembly. While there's no planned leadership transition in that House, there always is the possibility that there is some changes to committee chairs, but that is less likely. We know it will happen in the Senate. Next year we're gonna have the potential to influence the remainder of the 2/3 of the climate bond funding that's outstanding. In my experience, having worked on several bonds in the past, they will stretch out the funding over several years. So I don't think all the remainder of the funds will go out next year. It's certainly a possibility. But we look forward to having conversations with you all on how to target our advocacy efforts to benefit SCTCA's interests and opportunities to go after funding there. Not listed here too, but I guess it's an honorable mention, is that $1 billion in cap and trade for legislative priorities. Every year there will be an opportunity to engage with the legislature on how they want to allocate those dollars. Over the last couple of years, there's been an effort to also place a housing bond on the ballot. We thought this year might be the year. It did not turn out as such. And so perhaps next year, this is something that will get done, particularly with cap and trade and the climate bond done and sort of starting to move forward with implementation. It may create space for a housing bond. We've presented and talked to you all about the work Assemblymember Wilson is doing to look at options for supplementing or replacing gas tax revenues, recognizing dwindling funding, particularly in 4 or 5 years from now. We're going to start to see that at the state level and at the city and county level. And I'm willing to bet there's a chance of legislation on this issue in 2026. So we'll keep you posted there. And then the Newsom administration, which is in its last year and a few months, is working on several reports. Due out later this month is the Transit Transformation Task Force, which is supposed to make several recommendations for how to transform transit, TDA funding, policy changes that could help bolster transit across the state. And then we have just kicked off a new SB 375 Sustainable Communities Task Force. And I got lucky enough to get picked to sit on that effort along with MTC and many of your regional agency counterparts. And so we will be talking about all things greenhouse gas emissions reductions, vehicle miles traveled reductions, and how we just plan for and fund those plans to meet the state's climate goals and build more sustainable, vibrant, livable communities. There's a complementary effort too. As you may know, the Big Four MPOs have convened a working group in addition to the state administration working group that is going to be talking about the same issue. So we'll see where those two efforts sort of align, diverge, where there's room for legislation in 2026, if any. And then sort of tied into the Transit Transformation Task Force, transit funding flexibilities such as fare box recovery requirements expire in June of 2026. And so part of that task force and its recommendations was done purposely to give the legislature and administration some time to figure out what they may want to do in terms of those flexibilities. There will be many more issues. We have a special election coming up in a few weeks, and that has the potential to make next year interesting for a variety of reasons. And so these are what we think we will see next year, and then stay tuned for all of the developing policy and political issues that come up on any given year. And with that, I will turn it back over to you all, and we will answer questions.
Thank you very much. First, I'm going to ask if there are any members of the public in person who wish to comment on this item. Seeing none, Dawn, do we have anyone online or any comments received in advance?
There are no online comments.
Great. Before bringing it back to the board for any questions or comments on what was presented, I did want to share another topic that came up at executive committee and also probably in lots of your email inboxes and in a phone call that I had with TAM Chair Eric Lucan over the weekend, which is the topic of HOV hours on Highway 101. Which I think has been getting quite a bit of community concern for folks who are commuting, through Marin to San Francisco or beyond. Chair Lucan proposed the idea of a joint letter from SCTA and from TAM, just basically encouraging Caltrans, which they've already promised to do, but sort of to expedite this analysis and revisit of the hours, given the commute time delays that are being experienced by many working members of the public at this point in time. we are actually looking at canceling our meeting in November. And so we wouldn't be able to sort of, approve a letter there. But if the board sort of all has similar opinions, which is a big if, which is why I want to say this before going to you all to hear what you have to say. And if the board would be willing, we could potentially delegate authority to an ad hoc or, sort of sub-quorum of the board to work with Executive Director Cameron and with TAM to come up with some kind of a joint letter. And, I personally, just sort of speaking my feelings about this, I do support HOV in general, and I think it's an important tool to advancing our climate goals. That said, adding, an hour, I'm hearing sometimes an hour and a half, 2 hours to, a round trip commute where folks are then unfortunately impacting the particulate matter that we're all breathing by sitting there idling on the freeway is likely not in the best interest of the public. And so there may be a way, to right size this in a way that still, can advance our climate goals while also potentially reducing collective misery. So just throwing that out there, sort of my 2 cents, and would love to hear everyone else not only, ask questions based on the presentation, but hopefully also provide some feedback and commentary on this HOV situation. And I did check in with council, and since this is an action item, we can give that direction to staff to sort of delegate that authority and move forward with a letter at this board meeting. So anyone want to jump? I know my colleague has had some feelings in the paper about this. So, so Director Rabbit.
Thank you very much. And thanks for bringing this up. And I'm glad that I support sending a letter in. I do think that the hours need to be looked at. I think initially, and I said this before to our executive director in that committee, it was believed that Marin would have the biggest heartache because they would have the expanded hours. And as it turned out, the heartache was shared by both counties. I do think that commute patterns have changed significantly since COVID. I do think that days of commute patterns have changed as well as the hours of the commute pattern itself. We don't have the same opportunities I don't think we've ever had in the North Bay. Knowing my wife, who has commuted for the last 43 years to San Francisco each and every day, the patterns are noticeably different even between Marin and Sonoma, and who has the opportunity to carpool and who doesn't. So I do think that this is timely. Certainly, it was noted that the stickers are going to go away on cars, and eventually, I would imagine, and I said this before, we're probably looking at an express lane type approach as opposed to a fixed hour HOV. And the express lane does give you the opportunity to be much more dynamic, flexible. It can be on or off. It can be higher or lower. You can change many different things. And that money actually then could get pumped back into public transit, as it were. So, that's another discussion for another day. But for the interim, I think the support for a letter going forward to look at the hours and actually have some research and data behind it, especially given the new circumstances that we're all experiencing. And just anecdotally, again, I'll tell you this: I got many different letters from many different folks saying they've just had to change their commute pattern by, not just minutes but hours in order to avoid the backup that is now occurring, which I don't think was ever intended to happen that way.
Thank you, Director Rabbit. Other comments or questions, Director Corsi?
Yeah, I support writing the letter, and I support Caltrans looking at the hours and looking at the data. And I think everybody who spoke at the Novato Narrows, the Marin Sonoma Narrows ceremony said that that was the plan. But I do have a couple questions. And one is just anecdotally from my point of view is my email changed a lot from the weeks before the project was fully opened to the weeks after it. And I'm wondering if anyone else has noticed that. Is it any better now that the carpool lanes are fully open? The other question I have, and this is just brought up by your comments, David, is what would it cost to create an express lane? And is there any budget at this point for that?
Yeah, so just to directly respond to the express lane budget. So with regard to, One Berry grant, there's two different buckets associated with it. One is the local programs, one is the regional programs. I don't believe this body would be interested in sacrificing local programs for the highway, but I do think it is something we could advocate for MTC as part of their robust express lane network to potentially fund some studies or fund some investigation from the regional programs in the next round of One Berry grant.
That's something that we could add to our ledge platform next year. Yeah. Any observations on before and after the project was opened?
So my own email box lit up when it first went into effect with the signs, first with the confusion. Then even once the confusion was resolved, there was still coming in. Since it has gone into effect, I'm not getting it directly. I'm just seeing it through the newspapers and through the media still.
Other comments or questions, Director Ford?
I certainly support sort of putting a group together to craft a letter along the lines you specified, which is just encouraging them to look into it, get some real data out there. It's tough to tell right now how much we're talking, how big the problem is for how many people. It feels premature at this point to include in that letter what the solution is, an express lane or whatever. It feels down the line to me, but whatever the group comes up with is fine. Can I also ask a question about the presentation if our presenters are still here? So in the Cap and Invest program, in the new waterfall and the buckets and the categories, are there inflation adjusters on those? This is a 20-year program.
I do not believe so. I will see if Chris can confirm that. I think they are flat amounts.
Yeah, they are flat amounts. And so that is definitely a departure from prior where it was based on percentages. So,
Right. Okay, thanks.
Other comments or questions? Director Hinton?
Let me see, is that working? There it is. Okay, I got it. I always have to comment on these because I have been a commuter. I also have done carpool both to Marin County and now I'm headed up to Healdsburg on a daily basis. And you can really see the difference that this expanded coverage has made, especially for Sonoma County. You can just shoot a hole in the highway between 5 a.m. and 7:30 a.m., generally speaking, going north. And yet the new carpool lanes are, I think, 5 to 10. So you've got so many people getting out into that lane that really shouldn't be there and are not carpooling. So I don't think CHP can catch them all. So anyway, to just align our carpool lanes to ease the burden of those that have to drive would be, I think, beneficial to everybody, and especially such a letdown after we've waited for so many years for that Nero's project to open and then have this happen. So anyway, in favor.
Great. Other comments or questions from my colleagues? I am hearing support for the concept of a letter and potentially delegating that authority to an ad hoc. Who would like to be on that to provide feedback and to work with Executive Director Cameron, Supervisor Rabbit? Other voices? Janice? Yeah. Okay, great. Director Keeter Thompson and anyone else? We're going to trust it to South County. Yeah. All right. Okay. So with that, we have our liaisons and thank you very much for moving that forward. In terms of other actions, do we have any requests, for affirmation of any of our positions? I didn't sort of see any recommendations, more of a report out.
Yep,
Great.
purely a report out, and we're getting ready to start look at 26.
Perfect. All right. So with that, we have our direction, and I believe we can move on to our next agenda item. Thank you so much. And so this is going to get into our budget conversation, and we're actually going to sort of take all of these. They're just going to go from sort of one presentation to the next. We'll get that all done, and then we can ask questions on any if that works for everyone. And so Tanya is going to kick it off.
Good afternoon, Chair Hopkins and directors. So we are here to present the final FY 25-26 budget for your review and adoption. As background, by October 31st of each year, the SCTA RCPA must adopt 5 final budgets for operations to continue. The 5 budgets cover the RCPA, the Transportation Fund for Clean Air, or TFCA program, Measure M, Go Sonoma, and then SCTCA general operations. So we will present the 5 final budgets and then turn it back for questions and discussion. And I will start with the RCPA budget. So a couple of high-level items to comment. All staff are employees of SCTA. And our final budget that we're presenting to you today reflects one significant change from the preliminary budget, which is that the Bay Run revenue is decreasing due to the proposed closure of the Bay Run Water Upgrade Save program. And with the closure of Water Upgrade Save at the end of this year, the share of RCPA's revenue from Bay Run decreases from 83% of our total to 61%, and the remaining 39% of the budget comes from member contributions and grants. We are not proposing any layoffs as part of this budget change, and I'll explain later how we are handling that or the staff impact. And lastly, RCPA continues to struggle to find a sustainable funding source for our climate action. Funding is limited, and our fund balance continues to be negatively impacted. So next, I will preview the changes in revenue for the new fiscal year. So the pie chart on the lower right shows how much of RCPA's revenue is from Bay Run versus our other contributions. And the revenues that are shown here for Water Upgrade Save funded utility and recruitment efforts earlier in our fiscal year, and now through the end of 2025 are funding the tasks required to close the program. The closure of Water Upgrade Save at the end of the year results in approximately 2.1 million in loss in revenue. And the program funded approximately 2.5 of our FTE. And in the second half of our fiscal year, the costs for these FTE will be funded primarily by transportation funding sources and shifting some Bay Run work that is currently provided by consultants to SCTCA staff. We also removed $26,642 in revenue from the budget due to the termination of the USDA grant that funded the Marin Sonoma Ag and County Climate Coalition that RCPA had a role in. And the increases in revenue for the EV charging plan and local contributions did not change from the preliminary budget, so there's no change there. So in summary, the lack of a sustainable funding source for RCPA and the loss of Bay Run funding means that work on our climate programs without a direct transportation nexus will be significantly reduced. And looking ahead to the next fiscal year budget, so FY 26-27, we won't have any funding for Water Upgrade Save in the budget. And so our budget will be closer to 50% Bay Run and 50% other sources. So you'll see the total continue to decline unless we find other new sources of funding. And then on the expenditure side, obviously the closure of Water Upgrade Save has an impact on our expenditures. We have a decrease of approximately 1.4 million in consultant costs due to the closure of Water Upgrade Save, decrease of approximately 29,000 in reimbursement of overhead costs, and then a decrease in funded staff time. And that 354,000 decrease in staff time includes the staff time freed up from Water Upgrade Save closure, as well as the termination of the USDA grant. And due to the lack of new climate funding, staff no longer working on these climate projects will be reassigned to eligible transportation-related projects and programs. So lastly, in terms of our staff recommendation, I show the proposed final budget on this slide. I did want to note that in our preliminary budget, we included the use of approximately $116,000 in fund balance. And in our final budget, the use of fund balance has been minimized by shifting reimbursable staff time from climate project and programs to transportation funded work, and also reducing the scope and budget for consultants to provide Bay Run outreach and marketing services by bringing some of those services in-house for our staff to work on. So in closing, staff recommends that the board adopt the RCPA FY 25-26 final budget. So now I'd like to introduce David, who will cover the TFCA, Measure M, and Go Sonoma budgets.
Thank you, Tanya, and good afternoon, Chair and Directors. The first budget I'll be discussing with you is the Transportation Fund for Clean Air. This program is administered by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and they distribute 4% of the funds to SCTCA for administration of projects within the county. The program and projects for fiscal year 26 were approved by the board back in May at the preliminary budget meeting, and 6.25% of the funds are used by our administration of the program. Changes for fiscal year 25-26 on the revenue side, we have a 3% increase in TFCA revenue estimate from DMV. And then we also have projects that are complete under budget, so we're rolling over funds there. So overall, you can see the budget on the revenue side is about 700,000 for fiscal year 26. For expenditures, similar to how we showed this back at the preliminary budget to the board back in May. The expenses for fiscal year 24-25 used to be split between prior year and current year expenditures. Now we're showing them all here together just to make it a little easier to do a year-over-year comparison. So we have also a roughly 5,877 decrease in administration costs due to that cap on the 2.5% we can spend for admin costs based on prior year revenue actuals from the DMV. With that, we recommend that you adopt the fiscal year 26 TFCA final budget, and I will next move on to the Measure M budget. So Measure M was voter approved back in 2004. The measure expired on March 31st of this year, but it was extended with the Ghost Sonoma sales tax until 2045. We administer Measure M in compliance with the voter approved expenditure plan and the board approved strategic implementation plan. And I should note that the final sales tax revenue receipts we got from the California Department of Tax Administration showed that we received 97% of our original estimate we had from back in 2004. So that's a really great achievement considering we went through a major recession and a pandemic in that time. Just to kind of show you the history of the sales tax over the last few years, coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had very strong recovery in fiscal year 21, 22, before kind of peaking at fiscal year 23 at 32.6 million. Due to inflation and kind of stagnant revenues, we've had some decreases over the last couple of fiscal years. For fiscal year 25, there was only 3/4 of revenue as Measure M transitioned to Ghost Sonoma on April 1st. So that's why you see a decrease of 23.3 million fiscal year 25. There's no future sales tax revenue for Measure M, and we are relying on fund balance and interest earnings going forward. Here's the pie chart of the Measure M expenditure plan. 40% of the program went towards Highway 101, 20% to major local streets projects, 20% to local street rehabilitation projects, 1% for our administration of the program, 4% for bicycle and pedestrian projects, 5% for rail, and 10% for bus transit projects and programs. On the revenue side for fiscal 26, as noted, sales tax revenue ended on March 31st. However, we still have fund balance. We also have some funds that we pass through the Measure M budget, including Regional Measure 3 funds for projects on Highway 101, and also federal Safe Routes to School programs that we also pass through Measure M. We are assuming conservatively 170,000 in interest for the coming fiscal year. However, based on recent years, that may be higher going forward. Overall, you can see on the revenue side, we have a decrease of approximately 24.1 million compared to the prior fiscal year. And that is really just dependent on not having any sales tax come in and be reliant on interest earnings and other funds being passed through the revenue side. On the expenditure side, we have significant decrease in expenditures. However, we still have some expenses going forward. There's a 11.3 million decrease in contributions to federal governments as payments for Measure M, local streets and roads, and local bus transit payments have ended. As you can see in your budget attachments, those funds have zero balance and they were fully paid out at the end of fiscal year 25. We do have continued expenditures in local streets projects, most notably with the delivery of the Hearn Avenue Interchange project. And also the board previously approved a 9 million transfer out from the Highway 101 program to SCTA that's for local agency administered projects on the STIP exchange. And so those projects will be discussed further in the SCTA budget as well. Overall, there is a change in expenditures of approximately 10.5 million compared to the prior fiscal year. With that, we recommend that you adopt the fiscal year 25-26 Measure M final budget. And next, I will be going to the related Ghost Sonoma budget. So as noted earlier, Ghost Sonoma was approved by the voters back in 2020. Revenue collection began on April 1st of 2025 and will extend until 2045. And similar to Measure M, we administered Ghost Sonoma under the voter approved expenditure plan and the board approved strategic implementation plan, which are both available on our website. Here you can see the pie chart for Ghost Sonoma. Compared to Measure M, there is no highway program and there is no rail program. We have roughly double amount of funds under the Ghost Sonoma roads funds for local street repair at 38% compared to 20% for Measure M. And then there's a significant increase for the transit programs. with 18% for transit operations, 3% for first last mile programs, and 2% for fare-free reimbursements for transit operators. On the competitive side, we have the Move Traffic Improve Safety Program with 20%, 27% of the funds, and the Build Bikeways and Pathway Program with 12% of the funds. For the BBP program, 1% of the funds are used for community benefit programs such as Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero, and 11% of the funds are competitive. On the MTS side, 27%, the entire program is for competitive. However, I should note the board previously approved a policy to use up to 5% of the funds for capacity building to help provide grant application support to leverage those SOMA funds. These were most recently used for the SCTCA funding program to help with those applications, and we'll be coming with future actions in the future to talk about additional uses for those capacity building funds. Just to give you an update on where we're at on sales tax revenue collection, for the second quarter of 2025 compared to 2024, we've had a decrease of approximately 1.1% in revenue. That's largely due to decreases in the building construction sectors as people are pulling back on discretionary remodels just due to high prices and the state of the economy. We also have a 4.3% decrease in fuel and service stations. Notably, we also had a slight decrease in restaurants and hotels. That's the first major decrease we're seeing since the end of the pandemic as people are pulling back on discretionary expenditures. Due to the state of the economy with a lot of uncertainty on tariff policy and on interest rates, we're seeing a lot of discretionary expenses pulled back and people really kind of managing their finances more conservatively going forward. Looking forward on the revenue forecast, our actuals for fiscal 25 were 7.6 million for Go Sonoma. That was for the one quarter of fiscal 25. That was Go Sonoma funds. The rest were Measure M. And we're projecting a 1% decrease for this current fiscal year down to 31 million. Going forward, we anticipate a slight increase of 2.2% for fiscal 27 before returning closer to historic growth rates in fiscal 28 and fiscal 29 to 32.5 and 33.3 million. As noted, so we're forecasting the sales use and use tax to decrease 1% compared to last fiscal year. And that shows up here, as noted earlier, with the 300% increase in revenue compared to fiscal year 25. On the expenditure side, we have a significant jump in expenditures. That's largely due to the start of payments for the Go Sonoma Roads and Go Sonoma Transit programs. We got approval from the board last month on doing a adjustment to our fiscal 25 budget to have those first payments for Go Sonoma go out, and we'll be working with your staffs to get those first payments out very shortly. We also have 1.27 million in costs for consultant services for our commuter program, Safe Route School program, and capacity building funds, as noted earlier, and then $530,000 for staff time to administer those programs. Overall, we're looking at 34.3 million in expenditures for fiscal 26 under Go Sonoma. With that, we recommend that you adopt the fiscal year 25-26 Go Sonoma final budget, and I will turn it over now to Brenton Hare to discuss the SCTA budget.
All right. Hello, I am Brenton Hare. I am the Fiscal and Administrative Analyst for the SCTCA, and I will be presenting the SCTA portion of the final budget. So the SCTA was created by ordinance in 1990, and it has 17 full-time positions. All staff for the organization are employed by the SCTA, and the SCTA is in manageable financial shape. Some noteworthy changes from the preliminary budget have already been mentioned, but they include the receipt and expenditure of STIP funds from the Measure M Highway 101 fund and a reduction in reimbursements for BayRen and RCPA labor. This is the organizational chart for the SCTA or SCTCA. And as you can see, it includes all 17 employees. And of note, the Senior Marketing and Communications Specialist is vacant. That position is fully budgeted, but we do not currently have plans to fill it. This slide covers SCTA budgeted revenue. Noteworthy changes are the increase of labor reimbursements from the Go Sonoma program picking up of $115,000, and a budgeted decrease of reimbursements for labor from RCPA Bay Rent of $359,000. We are expecting and budgeting to receive $2 million in Regional Measure 3 funds for environmental design work on State Route 37-121 and $809,000 in federal funds from the Safe Streets and Roads for All 2023 program and the 2024 grant that is new. And not included on this slide or in these revenues are the $9 million of funds that the SCTA will be receiving from Measure M. The expenditures for 25-26 are expected to increase $434,000 due to the addition of a community engagement officer and a staff-wide cost of living adjustment that occurred at the preliminary budget. Consultant services are expected to increase by $2.2 million due to services for that, again mentioned, Highway 37-121 RM3 program. And the contributions to other governments are up from last year due to $2.7 million from the STIP Exchange Fund, STIP Exchange Program. And lastly, we ask that you approve the 25-26 SCTA final budget. The adjustments here, the $9 million adjustment, recognize the STIP Exchange funds. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll go ahead and bring it back. Actually, let's go to any comments from members of the public in person on the budgets. Seeing none. Dawn, is there anyone online who wishes to comment on our budgets?
There are no online comments.
And nothing received ahead of time.
No, there's nothing received ahead of time.
Thank you so much. So with that, I'll bring it back to my colleagues for any questions or comments. I think that's a sign of having done a very excellent job. So, you know, the one thing that I really appreciated was that we are in manageable financial shape. I feel like the next time someone asks, how are you doing? I'm going to be like, I'm manageable. No, right. Yes, Vice Chair Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Hopkins, and thank you to our incredible staff for managing these robust presentations. I did have a question about the change from Measure M to Go Sonoma and what was highlighted with respect to rail no longer being included in those funds, as well as highway no longer being included in those funds. And I think I understand the rail. I'm assuming it's because the sales tax measure for SMART was not yet in place when the initial Measure M was approved. I'm seeing a nodding head from our director. So is that the case? And then how do we anticipate to make up for the loss of highway funds if those funds are not available to be programmed with those funds?
So this is what was developed when we were working on the Go Sonoma expenditure plan to be voted on, and it was approved in November of 2020. So in those discussions, right, so there was the 5% was SMART, which was really to get them going, and now they have their own sales tax. Then with regard to the highway program, it truly was dedicated to nothing but Highway 101. And given that we were done with Highway 101, based on outreach to our jurisdictions as well as to advocates, the real focus became maintenance and safety as well as active and shared modes. So essentially that 45% just went into tripling the investments for bike and ped, nearly doubling the investments for local streets with regard to projects, and then doubling the amount of money that just goes by formula to the jurisdictions for paving projects and maintenance, and then doubling the amount of money that goes to transit to support our transit network. And it's just, so we're implementing the new expenditure plan. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I think that's great. And I don't necessarily have any concerns. I mean, I think it's actually wonderful, like where we're focusing the investment. I think my question's more of, given that Highway 101 is quote unquote done, are there ongoing financial needs that would go towards the highway that you anticipate for like maintenance, or ongoing financial need that you think is unfunded under that? And are we looking at, you know, any challenges in the future that we might want to be thinking about?
So there's so many different fund sources, right? And I believe that we are, for the most part, we are covered, right? We're covered in a few different aspects. One is that if it's pure maintenance of the highway system, Caltrans covers that under what's called their SHOP, their State Highway Operations and Improvement Program. When it comes to the improvements that we want on the highway system, the best dollar to use is what's called our STIP funds, or so not STP, which is Surface Transportation Program, that's federal dollars, but the state STIP program, STIP, is where we can invest those. And this board, through its approval of programming, has been making those investments for 8th Street East at State Route 121. And when we have our next state project that we're wanting to invest, if Caltrans is physically doing the work, those funds are the best to put towards it as opposed to our local sales tax. The other thing to keep in mind is that we do have commitments on Highway 101 for the next decade, but we also have significant fund balance within Measure M's highway program. So those dollars are going to be going to supporting those mitigation and monitoring that's primarily for plantings, right? There's still visual planting that needs to occur. And then after that, we will still be continuing to make sure the riparian trees, these are the trees that the resource agencies required us to plant for the impacts to the creeks that cross highway, is fully funded as well. And then just to kind of cap all that together, and when we look at those highway commitments, we saw that we had too much of a balance in Highway 101 and we didn't need all that. So that's why we did that $9 million STIP exchange. Our local jurisdictions would much rather have the local dollars to be able to expend than to jump through the hurdles through a Caltrans local assistance process to get at those state or federal funds. So we did exchange. We could have used that local money to do the visual planting. Instead, we did an exchange. We're going to use those STIP dollars to do the visual planting along Highway 101 and then freed up that money for the locals to spend more effectively.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? If not, would anyone like to make a motion? I believe we can make one motion for all of the budgets.
So moved.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. All right. And so again, that is the RCPA budget, TFCA, Measure M, Go Sonoma, and SCTA. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? That motion does carry unanimously. Thanks so much to everyone for the excellent work. Really appreciate a succinct and yet very informative presentation. With that, we will move on to reports and announcements, and I will hand it over to James for the Executive Committee report.
Absolutely. So our executive committee, we went over the current agenda that's before you today for our October 6th meeting. We also discussed about the executive director's annual review. Based on the input from the executive committee, we plan to do a closed session of the executive committee in December that will go out. Those of you that aren't on the executive committee, I would encourage all of you to reach out to me between now and then or anytime in general to provide any feedback you would like to provide as well. And also just to check in. I'm happy to do that at any time. You all have my cell phone and my email, and I'd be extremely responsive to all of you. So that's the plan for the annual review for the executive director, closed session in December. We had an update from our Citizens Advisory Committee discussion about the composition and renaming of our Citizens Advisory. There's consensus amongst both the Advisory Committee and the Executive Committee that renaming it from Citizens Advisory Committee to Community Advisory Committee to make sure that we're representing all members of our community has consensus in all of those discussions, but there's also a composition discussion that's happening. We have 25 members. Of those 25 members, we have more than half a dozen that just do not show up and are currently not engaged. So we are going to be going back to the Citizens Advisory Committee to get some more input from them, and we'll be back to this board with a recommendation on how we can work through a process to come up with a better composition and also look at, based on exec committee direction, not just look at it for our SCTA side of the house, but also our CAAC, which is our Climate Action Advisory Committee that would align well with our new branding, is getting that community input potentially from one advisory body that would be more efficient from a staff perspective. But just much more to come on that. I just wanted to brief the board on the exec committee discussions. We had an update about from Tanya on our climate, specifically about some funding discussions that all of your staffs were either engaged in or attended to coordinate on those grant opportunities that Politico Group talked about. And we made the recommendation to cancel the November board meeting. So our next board meeting will be the second Monday in December, and November will be canceled. That concludes my report out from exec committee.
Any questions from my colleagues on that? Seeing none, I think we have climate, or let's see, or regional agency reports. Does anyone have anything to share from regional agencies or boards or commissions that you are serving on? Any- Okay,
We will award, however, in October, hopefully, the construction contract for the seismic project for the bridge, so that's all focused on. Happy that we secured those funds.
that's a big deal.
It is a big.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just from smart over the weekend, we had 2 ribbon cuttings for the official openings of sections of pathway. First one from Petaluma to Pengrove, and the second one from Leonard Park to Santa Rosa. Getting a lot more pathway open. We've got 11-mile pouring to 5 mile.
that's very exciting. Anyone else? I did want to acknowledge that we are moving forward with potential amendments to our zero NOx rule at the Bay Area Air District, which is intending to phase out, right, gas-powered water heaters and space heaters. And it will be coming before I believe it's going to be the Stationary Source Committee for a first look later this year. And so I have not actually seen the proposed amendments yet, but they are really designed to address affordability and those cases in which it is not cost effective, to go ahead and electrify. So staff is working very closely with the implementation working group. And I just found out that we also now have an SCTA or CPA or SCTCA representative, which is BC, right? Awesome, on the implementation working group. So, and I believe that we also have representation from Sonoma Clean Power. I've also recently become aware of some concerns from the realtor community. And so we have also reached out to the realtor community to invite them to be part of the implementation working group and share those concerns directly and troubleshoot with staff as well. So seeing no other regional agency reports, let's jump into the marketing communications update from Ross.
Good afternoon, directors. Following are some quick highlights of SCTCA's engagement work over the past month. So ribbon cuttings have been mentioned a little bit. We did have a successful ribbon cutting ceremony at Olampali on October 3rd, celebrating the completion of the Marin Sonoma Narrows project. And I think everyone's pretty familiar with that, but it was quite a culmination of a lot of work. Upcoming new ribbon cuttings, we do have on October 24th, we've got a ribbon cutting for the 116-121 project. And I will be in touch regarding a future Hearn Avenue overcrossing ribbon cutting as well. I don't totally quote me. I believe we're talking about December in that, ideally. And then the Go Sonoma commute program, we're expanding the Diamond Dozen promotion, which was kind of inspired by the Diamond HOV lane, trying to offer some alternatives for folks that don't want to be involved in the traffic. So this utilizes a combination of paid social, bilingual radio, and amplification from partners. This will continue through October, but also and beyond. That's a partnership with TAM, and also we did get a little bit of funding from MTC to get the word out. So you may hear some little radio spots. Hopefully they sound good. And it basically benefits, highlighting the benefits of sustainable commuting, and is locked into our Go Sonoma Commute Rewards program, which was mentioned earlier in the Right Amigos platform. And then I just wanted to add, related to the HOV lanes, we have, as you've seen in the paper, had a lot of discussion with journalists. And so that definitely took up some of the outreach activity, and we'll be ready to communicate more as things happen. So please let me know if there's questions about these or any other engagement topics.
Great. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. And I believe we got Anna on climate change.
And a few slides just to accompany the updates. But good afternoon, Chair and Directors. Here are some highlights from our climate activities report for this past month. For planning, staff facilitated the second stakeholder advisory meeting for the equitable EV charging plan for Sonoma County. During the meeting, consultants reviewed a list of the top 40 EV charging sites across the county. The stakeholder advisory group members were asked to review this list and provide feedback to the project team. Next steps for this include publishing an online map of the prioritized sites and sharing in community meetings for additional input. Additionally, conducting infrastructure and cost funding analysis and producing a final report in May 2026. For projects, the greenhouse gas inventory and climate resilience indicators, staff are evaluating ClearPath, a software tool developed by ICLEI for managing our greenhouse gas inventory and tracking key climate indicators. BC also gave an overview of this tool at our September SCTCA Climate Change Partners meeting and discussed future opportunities for collaboration. Under programs, for water upgrade save, regulatory closure steps are moving forward. In accordance with CPUC regulations, Bayern hosted a program closure webinar for CPUC service list members on September 10th, 2025. In October, Bayern will submit an advice letter requesting a CPUC approval to close the water upgrade save program by December 31st, 2025. Additionally, as part of the program closure process, Water Upgrade Save final report will be published to capture program history and will be supported by a program document archive. And now, just a few highlights from our Bayern outreach and marketing. As you may know, we contract with the County of Sonoma's Energy and Sustainability team to provide ongoing support for Bayern implementation and marketing efforts throughout the county in partnership with SCTCA. And specifically myself. I have a quick update for you all on our single family program, Efficient and Sustainable Energy, or EASE Home. Since the program's launch in late July, we've had 127 site visits that have been scheduled. 68 of those site visits have been completed, with over 40 of those moving forward to signing the participant agreements. And 19 projects to date have been completed. We have a pretty healthy pipeline moving forward through the end of the year. Our goal for the first program year is to serve approximately 100 homes. So that's 100 completed projects. And just a quick refresh on the program. EASE is focused on weatherization and energy efficiency and supporting safety and health improvements for the home, as well as education. This program does serve homeowners and renters. Our program offerings include a free home assessment, where a trained program energy advisor visits the home, works with the homeowner to create a personalized project plan, and identify some specific measures moving forward, and really making sure that the homeowner and or renter knows what that project would entail. So I feel like really breaking it down into accessible language for homeowners for something that's often complicated is a really valuable add to the program. Additionally, Bayern covers up to 80% of project costs, so that's up to $8,000 what homeowners or renters and renters with landlord approval are expected to only pay 20% of the project cost, and that's capped at $1,000. Some of the upgrades may include attic or wall insulation, duct sealing or replacement, air sealing, weather stripping, and smart thermostats, just for some examples. And one of the key benefits for the program is that it really highlights the hassle-free installation. While developing this program, that was something that we repeatedly heard through our engagement efforts. People really wanted a comprehensive support service, and that's for identifying what improvements are best fit for the home, going through the rebate and permit pulling process, and connecting with contractors. And to qualify for this program, participants must live in a single family home built before 2010, be a PG&E customer, and have a household income at or below 120% of area median income. So that's really serving our moderate income households, though low income households are also able to participate if we feel that there's a program that's a better fit for them. We'll direct them to that accordingly. You can go to the next slide. Next, I just want to share a quick update on our multifamily program, our Bambi, as we call it, which provides technical assistance and rebate opportunities for property owners looking to install energy efficient retrofits for their property. The program is currently exploring opportunities to incorporate tenant education into the program design. These efforts are focused on the importance of behavior and education when it comes to energy efficiency and electrification improvements in the home and really in the multifamily sector at large. We recently introduced this at a September 25th workshop out at the West County Services Center, and the workshop was focused on saving energy at home and provided resources and programs for tenants and homeowners. The workshop was designed with both tenants and property owners in mind to share practical ways to save energy, lower utility bills, and improve comfort in the home. The session also covered simple tips, DIY projects, available incentives, along with information about programs and resources, really focused on energy and cost savings. The presentation also highlighted an overview of Ease Home. And excited to share that in addition to our 18 attendees, we had members from Univision who also attended the workshop. And we'll be releasing a segment later this week to highlight the work that's being done in Sonoma County, focusing again on our multifamily engagement and the Ease Home program. So exciting to have Sonoma County highlighted on a regional level. So I was looking forward to that. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, appreciate that and appreciate getting out into Guerneville. It's great to see the photo. With that, I think we've got Steph up next with planning.
Presenting. Hello, I'm Steph Britt, Transportation Planner with the Planning Activities Report. SCTA staff have been very busy developing the general plan build-out scenarios. These are scenarios where we evaluate the general plan and try to determine their future development potential for land use. For BMT reduction and mitigation, we held our second demonstration workshop in September to learn about recommended BMT exchange programs that could work. They evaluated how project examples such as housing projects of different sizes and mixed-use projects would interact with the exchange program. The potential BMT impacts, mitigation requirements, and cost to project sponsors and developers were explored during the workshop. Feedback on the draft recommendations report that was released in July and lessons learned during demonstration workshops are being incorporated into the final recommendations of the report, and they will be presented to the Board of Directors in December. For community-based transportation plans, or CBTPs, our phase 2 of engagement has concluded. The CBTPs for Rohnert Park and for South Santa Rosa are now complete. The TAC and the CRPs are now reviewing them with the prioritized project list, and the CBTPs will highlight 10 priority transportation improvements for both areas. The draft will be available for review in November. For the CTP, or Comprehensive Transportation Plan, staff are currently compiling the draft CTP and are incorporating information that was gathered as part of prior phases for the CTP update, which include outreach, engagement, the project list review, and the update, and finally, the performance assessment. Next, for the Regional Transit-Oriented Communities Policy, MTC, ABAG staff are working on revisions for the Regional Transit-Oriented Communities Policy and will present updates to the PAC later this month. MTC and ABAG will also provide technical support to local jurisdictions to evaluate the TOC requirements and compliance checklists. For priority conservation areas, many of the existing PCAs have been updated and amended with the assistance of Sonoma County Open Space District, regional parks, and other experts. The new PCAs have been approved for Cotati, Petaluma, and the city of Sonoma. The next call for projects for the PCA program will open later this month. MTCA BAG will be presenting on the PCA program at the October Planning Advisory Committee meeting. For active transportation, the county's active transportation plan will head to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors for adoption later this fall. And Petaluma has adopted their ATP in September. For mobility programs performance, the bike share program, as of September, is fully launched. There are 300 bikes out there deployed in the system. Ridership continues to grow with demonstrated increase, especially since Sonoma State University started back in August. And additional hubs have been activated throughout the area. For Safe Routes to School, 58 schools are now enrolled in the comprehensive program for education and encouragement for the 25-26 school year. SCTCA launched their Back to School Buddy Meetup Challenge in September, and we're looking forward to the International Walk and Roll to School Day this Wednesday. Finally, Sonoma Commuter Rewards Program has 1,063 registered members, and they are getting emails and are incentivized to participate in the HOV Diamond Dozen that Ross presented on previously. Finally, the Week Without Driving initiative was last week. Congrats to everyone that participated. There was a kickoff celebration last week, September 27th at Sonoma Clean Power, and staff attended to promote both Sonoma Commutes and the Redwood Bike Share program. And that's it.
Thank you so much. And next up, Shauna, projects and programming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, directors. Just a couple of highlights for you this afternoon. The first is on Highway 116 and 121. The contractor completed the final paving in the roundabout last month, and the final striping is scheduled to begin at the end of this week. And as Ross mentioned, there is a ribbon cutting ceremony scheduled for the 24th of October. On 121, Highway 121 at 8th Street East, SCTCA, our consultant, and Caltrans continue to coordinate the technical studies and deliverables to develop the draft project report and draft environmental document. And as part of that process, staff is consulting with the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria under AB 52 and preparing to complete cultural resources studies inside the project's area of potential effects with tribal monitors. On the Hearn Avenue interchange project, the contractor has successfully closed Hearn Avenue overcrossing in both directions this past weekend to complete the deck closure pour, and other construction activities that are happening right now include ramp work, temporary signal poles, and bioswale grading. And we mentioned that that ribbon cutting ceremony is being targeted for the end of the year. For the SCTCA funding program, David mentioned that we received the applications, and that I wanted to let you know that staff is preparing to schedule meetings with all of your jurisdictional staff to discuss the questions that we have regarding their applications and to verify priorities that your priorities are recorded as we go through our analysis process. Finally, I know Dr. Lowe is looking forward to this part. Caltrans is completing a railing replacement project at Highway 121 along the Arroyo Seco Bridge, also known as Shell Creek. And they are implementing a full closure for the entire month of October. And after initial implementation of the closure, Caltrans has been coordinating with us and with Sonoma County Public Infrastructure and the Sonoma City Public Works staffs to refine the signal timing at the intersections of 121 and Napa Road and 8th Street East, and Napa Road and Broadway, otherwise known as Highway 12, to reduce congestion from the detours. Emergency vehicles are being given access through the closure as needed for the entire duration of the closure. And SCTCA staff is also coordinating with Napa Valley Transportation Authority staff to ensure that the more informal detours that people are making are also being monitored. With that, I would turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Any questions from my colleagues? Yes, Director Lowe.
Very much. Obviously, there you go. The traffic in the area with the closure has been really horrendous because there are people that come and they're not from Sonoma, they're not even getting the information, and then they're having to be rerouted back up to Napa Road and out that way. It took me an hour to go 15 miles on Monday, and it wasn't like commuter time. The timing with the lights is really appreciated. I know that I spoke with the Sonoma City manager this morning, and they're also very aware of it. My big concern is that they're trying all kinds of other ways to get places. And my son works in St. Helena, and he went over Oakville Trinity grade because he wanted to avoid the area. He said he won't do that again, he promised. Because I mean, I know that road very well, but it's just not, something anybody should go on unless they happen to live at the top of the hill, right? But we kind of think there should be some signage there at the bottom, because also GPS is directing people over Oakville Trinity grade. And that happens without this closure. I've had people just say to me, oh my God, I was in Calistoga, getting here, they directed me over this road, and it's, GPS is now telling them to go over a road that is just hazardous at best. And there are cyclists that like to use that road for a workout. I guess they are welcome to it. But, and certain, I know there's a sign posted regarding multi-axle trucks are not allowed up there occasionally. Limousines and other vehicles find themselves perched up there on one of the curves. So anyway, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but, out of respect for the people who are living in the area, any of those kind of, especially assisting people who are trying to go in these other directions, it's quite hazardous out there. And I know that there was CHP down on Napa Road by Burndale, because people were cutting through Burndale and to get through there. It's just kind of a mess. So
I will make sure to bring up.
we're being patient, but I am concerned about the safety of people, especially going over and they may even try to go over Cavedale, which does not really connect unless you're driving on fire roads up there. There's really no, official way. There is, an official way to go over Oakville Trinity, but it's not recommended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other, yes, James?
Just to end the activities report on a positive note, I do want to let the board know that our US DOT grant, Safe Streets and Roads for All, the 2004 grant, we were able to get the amendments required by legal. We have executed that grant on September 22nd. So we were able to move forward with that work.
Any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, any members of the public wish to comment on any of the reports and announcements? Seeing no one in person, anyone online, Dawn?
No online comments.
All right, with that, any board member announcements?
I'd like to just make one comment, and that is that as my attempt to participate in a week without driving, I tried to come here on the train. And what I discovered was it was not possible for me to go from my house to the Windsor Depot, and there are no buses from my house to the airport area. And then I did get down to Grossman's, had a great lunch, had a ride over here, and I'm going to walk back over to the train station. But there is no bus from any train station to my house. And the shuttle closes at 4:45. So I brought up at our town meeting that we need to go back and analyze this, got a second from the vice mayor. And so we're going to see if we can figure it out and bring it here.
Wonderful.
Okay.
That's great. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night, everyone.